morning and welcome to the second in our series of online webinars, How to Read Safety Data Sheets. My name is Chrissy and I am the Consultant Coordinator at Chemsafety. Chemsafety is a New Zealand-owned company which was started in 1992. We have a team of 19 based at our offices in Christchurch and Wellington. All of our consultants are science graduates and they provide hazardous substance and occupational hygiene services to businesses. We are here to help you keep your team members safe and healthy at work and to help you navigate the New Zealand health and safety regulations. Please don't use the chat functions for asking questions. There is a Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen where you can post questions. If you like one of the questions already posted, you can click on the upvote button. The more voting it gets, the higher up the list it goes and the more likely it is to be answered during this session. Any unanswered questions will be added to the follow-up email you guys will receive, and that will also include a link to the recording of today's session. Dwayne is presenting our webinar today. Both Dwayne and I have been with Chemsafety since 2013, and during that time he has become the main presenter of the Certified Handler and Chemical Awareness courses. Dwayne specialises in customising training to meet clients' sites and their team's needs. He is approved by WorkSafe New Zealand as a compliance certifier for certified handlers, and with a Bachelor of Science from Canterbury University majoring in chemistry, coupled with his musician background, Dwayne's training sessions are factual, practical, and delivered in a relaxed manner. He is always approachable and happy to take the technical and explain it in plain English. I will now hand over to Dwayne.
Oh, thanks very much for that, Chrissy. That was an absolutely fantastic introduction. Yes, so as Chrissy mentioned, this is our second in the series of free webinar sessions that we'll be undertaking for the next few months or so. This is to do with material safety data sheets, or how to read them. Often I get questions, often a lot of statements about safety data sheets are that they are just indeed very complicated and very complex and very hard to understand. So what we'll do is we'll just simplify all of that, and we will undertake our slideshow. So I'll just pull up the slideshow here. Right, so just bear with me here. Okay. Are we good to go? Excellent. So yes, our free webinar series number 2, material safety data sheets. So I guess what this comes down to, and it's a really good question to start off with, and that is where can we find information for safety data sheets? So on our first slide, we can see what's going on there. Okay, we have a wee slight technical glitch. We can sort that out. Come back here. Just bear with us for a moment. Okay, hope that's better. Slight technical glitches there, but that's fine. We're able to deal with that. We are just starting off on these webinar series. So yes, free webinar series, series number 2 there. So our first slide. Where can we find information about our hazardous substances? So of course, right at the start there, we're able to see that we can actually find this information from training, company procedures, and work procedures on site. We're also able to find a lot of this information from labels and from safety information cards. However, what you'll find is that the material safety data sheets, they basically have a wealth of information regarding our hazardous substances. So other things that we've come across in the past is, we'll talk about safety data sheets and people are thinking, well, what does that actually mean? So just be aware, material safety data sheets, or material safety data sheet, MSDS, is exactly the same as SDS, safety data sheet. It's the same thing, okay? Where we're able to find this information about our safety data sheets. So it's the EPA, so the Environmental Protection Authority. They indeed have a notice, the 2017 notice, the Hazardous Substances Safety Data Sheets Notice 2017 has all that information that we need to know about safety data sheets at the workplace there. So some frequently asked questions about safety data sheets. Okay, so we've got, where can I get these safety data sheets from? Where am I able to source this information? Where can I get this document? And ultimately, it is the supplier or the manufacturer's obligations to ensure that the hazardous substances that they're supplying to you on site comes with a up-to-date relevant safety data sheet. However, if this does not actually happen, it is the PCBU's duty to ensure that safety data sheets are made possible for, it's the PCBU's duty to ensure that the supplier and the manufacturer are able to provide these safety data sheets. What will a safety data sheet provide me with? It will provide information on safe handling and use, and will have suppliers information and emergency response information. We'll go through all of the other information that is actually on that safety data sheet as well. And a very important thing to note is that these safety data sheets cannot be anything older than 5 years. So do check your safety data sheets regularly, just to ensure, and this can be maintained on some sort of an inventory where you're able to put the dates of issue or the dates of review of your safety data sheet, so you're able to keep all of this in check. Another additional comment that I have at the bottom of the slide is to do with some industries, whether it be laboratory, etc., so on and so forth. They use a short format key information card system or a safety information card on site. And I'll briefly cover that right at the end of today's session. So, next slide. And that is the main question. So we've gone through a couple of frequently asked questions, but the main question is, how do I read and understand this thing known as a safety data sheet? What is it all about? It just seems quite complex. There's lots of numbers and letters and all sorts of things, and a lot of people just do get quite confused by it. So what we will do is we'll just go through it in simple terms, easy to understand language, and we'll just run through what a safety data sheet is and what information you will find on this particular document. So, information, here we go. So what we have, especially as drawn out by the EPA's Hazardous Substances Safety Data Sheets Notice 2017, is that the information that's provided for you in this document comes in 16 sections. Okay, there are 16 sections for our New Zealand compliant safety data sheets. So what we will do, we'll go through each of these sections, and we'll just basically have a quick run through of the information that you'll find in each of these sections. Okay, so the very first 3 sections is to do with identifying the product and what the product contains as well. So the very first section, section 1, identification. So the information that we'll find on here would be things like the product name and any other kind of name that will go with that particular substance. Other information we'll find here is the recommended uses. It'll also have the supplier's details. So if you've gone through your safety data sheets and you're noticing that it's a wee bit old, it's from 2014 or 2015 even, luckily for your supplier's details are there. So you can contact them and just to get an updated version of your safety data sheet. Also, in the very first section of the safety data sheet, it should have emergency contact details. Okay, so there should be some sort of 0800 poisons, 111, things like that, those kind of emergency phone numbers on your safety data sheet. Right, section 2. Okay, so section 2 is known as the hazard identification section. In the section, it will identify the hazardous nature of that particular substance. So by doing that, they will use HAZNO classifications and or GHS classifications there. So also with this section here, it'll talk about the hazard and precautionary statements as per GHS, and it will have either phrases and or symbols or pictograms just to identify that hazard. Now, the second bullet point there, the HAZNO classification system there, that was our very first webinar that we undertook. So that was pretty much #1 in the series. So if you haven't seen that one, we can also send a wee link of that recorded video of us undertaking or explaining what the HAZNO classification system means. So yes, so that was the free webinar series #1. So we went through subclass, class, degree of hazard, and all of those bits and pieces. So like I mentioned, just feel free to give us a yell, give us a wee question on the Q&A, and we can easily send you through the link for the first webinar series. We covered all of this information as well about hazardous substances and has no classifications, and all of this as well. So following that, we have section 3, which is the composition. So information on the ingredients of the particular substance that your safety data sheet is providing you the information for. Okay, so if the substance has a retail or product name, you'll find that it's actually quite tricky to try and find information about that through the EPA database. Ideally, you'll need the chemical name or the scientific name for that particular substance. And luckily for us, in section 3, it will have a range, it'll give us a rundown on what the components are in your substance there. So you'll be able to find out what the chemical names are. If you can't find anywhere else, you will definitely find it here in section 3. It provides approximate concentrations and proportions of those components in the mixture. Now, it's approximate, it's not the exact amounts. As you can imagine, some of these things could be trade secrets, so they wouldn't want to give out the recipe for their marvelous hazardous substance that they're supplying you with, so they're allowed to just give approximate amounts. And if you're still struggling to find information about these substances, if you've put in the chemical name and it's still not giving you any answers, you can always use the CAS number there, the Chemical Abstract Service number. You dial that into any of those EPA databases and you'll definitely get information regarding that particular hazardous substance. So the next sections there, sections 4, 5, and 6, is to do with emergency response. Now, before I go any further, the thing with these sections in your safety data sheet, it's to do with the hazardous substance that you've been provided with, but you need to be aware that it's not site-specific. Okay, so it's pretty much common sense. It's not site-specific, so it'll give you general information about what to do in case of an emergency. So section 4 of your safety data sheet will talk about the first aid that needs to be, that is required for your particular hazardous substance. It provides instructions of first aid by route of exposure. So what to do in case of ingestion of the hazardous substances, what to do in case of skin or eye exposure, and also inhalation. It provides information on immediate medical attention and any delayed effects. And it also provides information on known antidotes to be administered by trained persons. I guess the main example there, or one that I can think of just off the top of my head, would be the hydrofluoric acid. And it does have the antidote for skin exposure known as calcium gluconate. It also has crucial information to the physician. So in any aspect or any situation that you're in, if you're in quite a bad situation where you've had to go to the hospital with any kind of exposure or ingestion or inhalation problems with your hazardous substance, ensure you bring the safety data sheet, as this section, your doctor, your physician will be able to refer to the section and be able to apply the correct medical procedure for you. Okay, so the next section there is the firefighting measures. Okay, so like I said, it's not site specific. So they're not going to tell you raise the alarm, evacuate, go to your muster area, all of that kind of stuff. This is more so outlined at telling you what the suitable extinguishing media will be for your fire extinguishers. It'll also talk about the hazards from combustion of the products, and it will give a good range of precautions for FENS and special protective clothing. It may even talk about the HazChem or the Chemla code, which is also in section 14. So that's the example that we have there on the bottom right hand of the screen there, the 3YE. Of course, this is not to be confused with our lovely has no classifications. Okay, so this is a completely different type of a code. Basically, this code means the 3 means the class of the hazard, the Y means the type of special protective clothing that FENS need to wear when they're dealing with the hazard, when they're dealing with the emergency, and E basically means it needs to be evacuated. The number beneath that is basically the UN number for any particular hazardous substance that they may be dealing with. Okay. Section 6. Okay, accidental release, so spills and leaks. So it'll just run you through exactly what types of steps to take if you've had any kind of a wee bit of a spill or a leak with regards to your hazardous substances. It will talk about methods of containment and cleanup. It will remind you of certain things that you must do if this event has taken place. So you need to be aware of drains, so you'll have drain covers, bunding, absorbent material, what types of neutralizing substances you should use, especially if it's either acidic or caustic. Okay, so there could be different types of neutralizing substances. So do be aware of what those neutralizing substances are if you have either acid or alkaline substances there. It'll also talk about equipment for cleanup, including the types of PPE you should be using for that substance. There will be a number of environmental precautions and some information there for councils, just in case the worst has happened and your spill has gone down the drain. Then at least when you call the council or your local council party there, you'll have information about that particular substance and what everyone can do about that. And also it will differentiate the differences between small, large and major spills. So what types of things you should be doing with regards to that. So as you can imagine, for a small spill, it might not be as involved as, say, a major spill. Okay. So sections 7 and 10. Now, I've grouped these two, even though they're not in the order of the safety data sheet, I've grouped them together as they have similar information, and also they do refer back to each other, these two sections. So section 7 being handling and storage. So it gives you information to do with the safe storage of your hazardous substance. Also the packaging, it'll give you a rundown on what type of packaging your substance should be packaged in, of course, and it may even give you information about incompatible substances. Now in your safety data sheet, if it doesn't say anything about incompatible substances in section 7, you'll probably find that it'll have some sort of a refer to section 10 clause in that particular substance. So that's the reason why I've grouped these two together. It'll also give you a little bit of a rundown on the separation of flammable substances if your substance is flammable, and also how to safely handle these substances. So some people may see it as like a common sense kind of instruction thing, but it's very important that these things are included in this particular document, whether it be what type of steps you'll take to minimize any kind of contact, the fact that there should be no eating, drinking or smoking with your substances, and also to wash hands and remove contaminated clothing before eating, and also minimize any kind of environmental exposure. So that's section 7, handling and storage. So the next one we have on this is section 10. So we've just jumped a few just ahead, only because these two sections, they kind of couple up together. So section 10 is the reactivity and stability of the substance. So as you can imagine, depending on how reactive and stable the substance is, will give us a wee rundown on how to handle and store the substance, okay? So in this section, it will tell you the chemical stability. It will talk about the conditions to avoid. So chemical stability meaning that, that it's stable under normal pressures and just sort of ambient temperatures and things. It will talk about conditions to avoid, whether it talks about avoiding ignition sources or things if it's flammable, and also incompatible substances. Again, it may refer back to section 7. So in section 10, you may have a wee clause there where it says, may refer back to section 7. And section 10 will also give you the rundown on the hazardous decomposition products that can be caused from the substance. So it'll give you a lot more information, say for instance, if your substance is oxidizing, and we'll talk about the decomposition rates there. And also if your flammable substance or flammable toxic substance was to catch fire, what type of gases, what type of toxins may form at the decomposition of those particular substances. So if we just rewind a bit to section 8 now, 8 and 9. Okay, so section 8 is the exposure controls and personal protection controls. All of the sections of the safety data sheet are very important. This section will give you a rundown on what your workplace exposure standard is. Okay, so if you're a worker who works with hazardous substances at a work site, all workers must have an idea on where to find out what their worker exposure standard is. You don't have to have it memorized, but you need to at least know what it is and where you can find this information. So you will be able to find this information in section 8 of your safety data sheet. So it will give a variety of ranges or a variety of facts and figures. The first one being the WES for your TWA, which stands for your time weighted average. So it's the average over an 8-hour exposure period for 40-hour weeks kind of thing. And then you'll have the STEL, S-T-E-L, which stands for short-term exposure limit. And this is usually the average, usually over 15 odd minutes there. So, and it should not, where the TWA is not exceeded. However, this is more so for certain types of substances. So not all safety data sheets will have the STEL, but certain substances do not have this exposure, short-term exposure limit. In other words, it may not be hazardous enough to actually have this type of figure. Right, in this section also, it'll talk, well, it'll have a wee basic understanding of hierarchy of controls, where it outlines the engineering controls within that hierarchy of control. And what you'll find almost for all safety data sheets, it'll mention something to do with ventilation, whether it be local exhaust ventilation or any of that kind of stuff. Okay, and then finally, if they talk about your workplace exposure standard, talk about TWL, your STEL, the hierarchy of controls, engineering controls, it will then give information about PPE. So it kind of goes in that type of order. And it'll tell you what types of PPE you should be using. So for that reason, yeah, very handy, very important section for you guys to be aware of. That's section 8 of your safety data sheets. Section 9. Now, this is the one that probably may confuse some people the most. The beauty of this section is that it is more so to do with data. An important take-home message for section 9 there is just to ensure that the appearance, the physical state, form and colour and odour of the substance is consistent with the substance you indeed have there. It has information on the pH, so this is important if you need to understand if it is either acid or alkaline, and vapor pressures and also vapor densities. It has information to do with your boiling point and your melting points. It may even have information to do with boiling points and flash points if your substance is indeed flammable. It has other information there, as you can see, solubility, specific gravity or density, and a flammable, yes, flash point, as mentioned before, the upper and lower flammability limits, and the auto ignition temperatures. So yeah, section 9, it's probably the more complicated section of the safety data sheet. However, just be aware that some of these things are very interesting. However, it does not have to be memorized. Okay, so section 9 does not have to be memorized, and you can pretty much go through most sections of the safety data sheet and and it makes a lot of sense. So don't be too worried if you don't understand the entirety or the ins and outs of section 9 of your safety data sheet. Okay, so we've already talked about section 10, which is to do with reactivity and stability. So we've jumped now to section 11, which is the toxicological information. Okay, so this will give us the information to do with acute and chronic health effects. So in our previous webinar, when we talked about HAZNO classifications, this pretty much covers class 6, human toxicity. Okay, so acute and chronic health effects. And also, it'll talk about the possible routes of exposure and any effects on those exposures. It'll talk about the dose and concentrations likely to cause injury and may contain animal or human data on toxicity. So not just doses and concentrations likely to cause injury, but also likely to cause any kind of fatal effects. And the data that it has there on human and on animal test subjects, basically this data just allows us to understand the toxicity, allows us to understand what a safe limit could be for us to be exposed to. This is where the LD50 comes into play from our previous webinar. But again, if you missed it, we'll be able to send you a link, send you a wee link to that particular recording to do with our HAZNO classifications, and that will clarify any information you might want to know about the section 11 of our safety data sheets regarding toxicological information. And of course, there may be some delayed effects. Okay. And so, yes, here we go. So we'll just a very brief recap on human toxicity, class 6. As you can see there, routes of exposure being ingestion, inhalation, skin and eye absorption as well. And it kind of links up with section 4, our first aid section of our safety data sheet. You have things that are immediate effects. So that's that definition of acute toxicity, immediate effects. Acute poisoning, which was our 6.1. So you can see all of those numbers there. Again, if that's somewhat confusing, we will definitely send you that link to our previous webinar there. Section 12 is to do with our ecological information. Okay, so what we have here is it gives you a rundown on the ecotoxicity, whether it be aquatic and terrestrial plants and animals. And also it will give you a rundown on the persistence and degradability of that particular substance in the environment. It'll talk about the potential to be bioaccumulative, so if things can sort of compound and add up as you're going along. And also it talks about the mobility in soil and other effects. Information on bioaccumulation, persistence and degradability must be given where available and appropriate for each of the relevant components in that mixture. So yes, section 12 is all to do with your ecotoxic information there. And again, just a quick rundown there, ecotoxicity class 9, they are the different types of subclasses within that particular category. Section 13, disposal information. Okay, best practice, of course, it will be to contact a third-party contractor. And if you are using a third-party contractor, you're not actually disposing of the substance yourself. You're giving that particular hazardous substance to a third-party contractor. This section also provides appropriate and achievable disposable methods, and also disposal of the packaging. Okay, so it gives you good information on what to do there. Special precautions are to be taken during disposal. So that's any kind of special precautions that you might need to do for your package or your substance. Say, for instance, if it's an old package, 20-litre container, needs to be rinsed out or needs to be made so it's no longer hazardous if you need to dispose of it, or you need to make sure that these packages can no longer contain hazardous substances as well. Any method of disposal should not, so not just any method of disposal that should be used. So we'll just talk about things that you should not do to dispose of the substance. But as mentioned, that very first bullet point there kind of takes away any of the confusion with regards to disposal of your substance. If you're using a third-party contractor, so long as you've got your documentation all in order, they're able to take care of any of those matters. So section 14 is our our transportation information. And as mentioned previously, this is where they have information to do with the HazChem signage, but also we have our UN numbers, okay? So example of that UN number is the bottom part of this Chemla sign, or this HazChem sign. It'll give you a rundown on the DG classes and any other subsidiary risk number class as well. I'm not too sure if you noticed, but in the background, we do have some examples of DG placards that you may see if you have anything to do with transportation of hazardous substances. So there we go, we've got our HazChem Chemla code. That's the example that we have to the right there in orange. It talks about packing group numbers, land, and it has information to do with our Land Transport Authority as well. Okay. And then we have, and also does have the proper shipping name. So what we can do now is if we move on, precautions for the users in some cases there. So section 14 are very important if you're involved in the transportation industry. It'll give you a good rundown on what you should be doing, or the information that should be displayed while you're transporting these hazardous substances. Section 15 is the regulatory information. Okay, so it may give you the HAZNO approval number, or the HSR number, and the particular group standard for your substance. Also what you have there is a reference to TEL, tolerable exposure limits, and EEL, environmental exposure limit, if the substance has environmental implications there. There is also a reference to other regulatory requirements. So as it states there, it may have information regarding certified handlers, whether or not it requires certified handlers, if it requires tracking, if it requires a controlled substance license, or if the Agricultural, Chemical or Veterinarian Medicines Act 1997 applies. It also talks about the other regulatory information that it may cover. It could be some sort of, could be some international agreements, which includes the Montreal Protocol, the Stockholm Convention, and the Rotterdam Convention. Number 16 there is other information. So we're on the last section of the safety data sheet. So we're drawing to a close there. So 16 is other information. So what we have with this other information is the date of preparation or review of the safety data sheet. So as mentioned right at the start of the talk, these safety data sheets they cannot be any older than 5 years, especially in the current climate that we are in New Zealand. We've had a big changeover of our hazardous substances legislation. So the difference between the information that's on a safety data sheet, say from 2015 to what should be on the safety data sheet now, will be quite different. There will be some differences there. So very important to ensure that your safety data sheets are no older than 5 years. So in section 16, you will be able to find out how old the substance is. Other places to find out the age or the review dates of your particular safety data sheets is either the footer or the header, and of course, indeed, in section 16 of the safety data sheet. Other stuff that it talks about, it'll give you a wee chart or a wee table where it explains what the abbreviations and the acronyms are that have been used during this document. And also it will talk about references of any other kind of information where it gets other information from during the course of the safety data sheet information, and other disclaimers as well. So if we just have a wee chat about the safety data sheet key safety information cards, I mean, this is just sort of an add-on to safety data sheets. These at the moment, there's a wee bit of guidance on what kind of things information you can have on these, but it's pretty much those things that I've outlined there in the red ring. So sections 1 and 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 13 can be included on a condensed key safety information card. So again, just remember that we find this information from the Hazardous Substances Safety Data Sheets Notice 2017. So what we will do now is any questions? Great, okay, I think we might have a question. Depending on how easy it is, we might be able to answer it straight away, but let's just have a wee look. Okay, Ruben. Hi, Ruben, how's it going? Is there any law around how quickly accessible safety data sheets should be from a particular hazardous substance on site? Now, that's an interesting one. Of course, it needs to be reasonably accessible, okay? So it needs to be on site. All of your workers also need to know where these documents are stored. So if you've got like a very huge site, ideally you'll need them closer to where you're actually storing your hazardous substances. So in this aspect of thing, I think common sense prevails. So just to ensure that wherever your hazardous substances are, you do have, and your workers do have, accessible safety data sheets on site. Is there any law around how quickly accessible safety data sheets are? What we can do also is type in an answer for you later on. So at the moment, it is that whole reasonably accessible statement is what is used in the legislation. Okay, so we have one, that's good. Thank you for that question, Ruben. And so that's pretty much ends our session. Just wondering if we can also put it through there. So that's our information if you need to contact us. If you would like a copy of the recording as well, we will send that through to you guys. And thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your patience. We look forward to seeing you in the next free webinar. Thanks from Chemsafety. Bye.